Good afternoon, good day to everybody who is following us for our third webinar in a series that we are doing in the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe in our project RECONNECT. It's a special pleasure to welcome today Christine Landfried with us, who will give a presentation, a webinar on the question connecting conference and convention. We may add a question mark to the title of this presentation of Christine Landfried, a new perspective actually to bring European citizens into the Conference of Europe. I'm very much looking forward to this talk of Christine Landfried, which we will start in a couple of minutes, because as you all know, on the 9th of May, the Conference on the Future of Europe has been officially inaugurated. During the inauguration of the Conference on the Future of Europe, actually, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned the following. She said, "The point is that the European Union must be whatever Europeans want it to be." A very clear signal towards representation, a representation that we may argue, and actually that we may also hear from Christine Landfried, has actually been challenged in the sense that the gap between European citizens and the so-called European elites, representatives in Europe, but also on the level of the European Union, has been widening, especially over the last decade, in a series of crises, which we may argue the European Union has not really been recovered from up until this day. So this Conference on the Future of Europe is arguably much more than just a conference about redesigning the European Union. It is actually a chance for the European Union to bring its citizens closer to what the European Union is actually trying to be, a representative union, a union that takes the differences of its citizens, but also of its member states seriously. And there couldn't be, I would argue, a better placed researcher and professor than Christine Landfried to actually introduce us to this very interesting topic, to actually think about the Conference on the Future of Europe and the question which effect it may have. Professor Christine Landfried is Professor Emerita of Political Science at the University of Hamburg. From 2014 to 2016, she was Max Weber Professor at New York University. Christine Landfried has been teaching at Sciences Po, the University of California at Berkeley, at Yale Law School, and her research interests include European integration, the cultural conditions of democracy, and the political role of constitutional courts. In all these research agendas, the notion of difference and the positive potential of difference play a crucial role in her research. She appears regularly on German media and as a commentator, for example, for the European broadcasting network Arte. She also regularly contributes to the internationally well-known Verfassungsblog. And last but not least, she has published in the third edition her book Das politische Europa in German. We are waiting for an English translation. Differenz als Potenzial der Europäischen Union, difference as a potential for the European Union, which has just been published with Nomos in Germany, in which she has a wonderful chapter on the link between the Conference on the Future of Europe and a potential new convention, which, as we all know, is a part of the treaty framework of the Lisbon Treaty. I don't want to talk much longer, just a technical remark from my side. If you have questions, please place it in the chat box so we can open the debate after the presentation of Christine Landfried. She will talk for about 30 minutes so that we have plenty of time to actually get started with our debate on the future of Europe, on the conference on the future of Europe, and the potential for a new convention on the future of Europe. Christine Landfried, it's a great pleasure to have you.
So thank you very much, Kolja, for this introduction, and thanks to the University of Leuven and your project RECONNECT Europe for inviting me to this webinar, and of course welcome to everybody listening now and participating in this webinar. I want to develop my argument within 3 steps. First, I want to give some notes what I think are the problems of the European Union, the main problems. So of course, I will only make it short, but this will be the first part. The second part will be why do I think that the conference on the future of Europe is one possibility to tackle with these problems. Of course, not to solve them, but to be a start to tackle with these problems. And the third step in my argument will be how should this conference on the future of Europe proceed in order to have a real effect on European governance, not just to be in the end, you know, some proposals on paper. So coming to my first point, what are the problems, the main problems of the European Union? I want to mention 3. The first problem, in my view, is that since decades now, the European Union has developed by ad hoc mechanisms, ad hoc solutions, because we had all these crises. They had to manage the euro crisis, the refugee crisis. Now they have the pandemic. And these crises, they were tackled by ad hoc measures, and there were not really participation of the citizens and not much of a public debate. But in the end, these ad hoc measures, they have transformed the European Union. So while we all thought this is perhaps just, you know, crisis management, in the end, European governance has changed. And European government has changed in the direction giving a gain in power for the executives and a loss of power for the parliaments and for the public spheres. Just to mention one example, the last example was the pandemic. The reaction was, as we all know, last year, the program Next Generation EU. This program means that the European Union takes up on the capital market debts for the first time. All the member states are liable for these debts. This was a taboo for a long time, but suddenly it was possible. What is also new, that part of this money is given to these member states who have the most problems with the pandemic. So the principle of solidarity is really realized with this program, Next Generation EU. Also, they have certain policies. They make digitalization, environmental policy. So combined with these taking up money, debts on the capital market, is a program of modernization of the member states of the European Union. Also, to take into regard the principle, the rule of law for giving money, even if not as extensively as we would have hoped for, but at least it has been a point. So as a whole, to summarize what is new in this program, New Generation EU, I would say this is somehow like a fiscal union, the birth of a fiscal union in the European Union. Of course, one can say, well, this is just an exception to manage the crisis. But my idea is that as it has been with the euro crisis, with the other crisis, everybody was saying, well, this is just for the moment, we manage the crisis. This will be changing governance of the European Union. One might be of different opinion if this makes sense or not. My opinion is that this program does make sense and the European Union should proceed in this direction. But now the big but is it is not publicly in the public spheres discussed. So the people just realize that there is a crisis management of the COVID-19 pandemic, but they don't realize that European governance has changed. If we want to be very concrete, the European Commission is becoming like a European financial ministry, because they influence a lot how this money is given and spent in the member states. So I think this idea to have a fiscal union is fine, but it should be, you know, democratically legitimized. It cannot just be part of crisis management. The second problem of the European Union is, and this follows from the first point, that there is a growing gap between the competencies of the European Union on the one hand. Here we see we have like a financial ministry and common debts, and on the one hand, and the democratic legitimacy on the other hand. So this gap is growing from crisis to crisis. We have the transformation to a European Union, which is becoming a political order. It is not just anymore a single market, an internal market, and not just about the economy, but you know, we have now so many competences in so many policy fields that this is a political entity, a political organization. And a political organization having so many political competencies must have democratic legitimacy. So something like a fiscal union, this cannot just be done by crisis management, but it would need changes of the treaties. It would need to be publicly debated. The third problem of the European Union is that the mechanisms of European governance, they promote the deregulation of the economy, and they are not so much in favor of regulating the economy. So if we look beyond the European Union and look at globalization, we all see that there are positive consequences of globalization, but there are also negative consequences of globalization. And the European Union so far did not succeed in shaping globalization, having a say in globalization in a way that this is shaped not just let it go wherever it goes. If inequality grows, then inequality grows. We also have positive sides. No, the European Union should really shape also globalization in a way to combine representative democracy and also have a social embedded market, not just market economy. And if we want to shape it in that direction also, it should be different. The mechanisms of European governance so far do not promote this. So having these three problems, I think now my second point, the conference on the future of Europe has a potential at least to start and reflect that the European Union has developed to be a political entity. So these debates between citizens, this will make people see how much competencies are already on the European level. So I think this is already one chance of this conference to reflect what has happened in the last decades, you know, by and not really discussed, but now this can be discussed. The conference is also a potential and a chance that all these 27 member states and the citizens participating, discussing, do experience that there is a positive potential of difference, of cultural difference, political difference, economic difference. In the real world, we have seen there is a negative potential of difference looking to the euro crisis. There is a negative potential of difference with regard to sovereignty interpretation, with regard to Brexit. But there are also positive elements. In social policy, we have quite a lot of examples where we can see that the member states learn from each other, and in the end, the regulations on the European level were positive. So I think this conference has a chance to reflect this, to make this a public debate. But then I think it should not end just in a document and papers. And so we come to our last point. How should this conference really proceed in order to have a real impact on European governance? If we think about how this conference should proceed, we can look to an example which has already happened in 2006 and 2007, because this is not the first time we have such a citizens' debate on the European level. Already in 2006-07, after the European the European, you remember the last convention when they wanted to make a European constitution. This failed in referenda in France and in Belgium. And so then they said, well, how do we proceed? And they had citizens' conferences. And these conferences, actually, they were evaluated by scholars and they really made a big research. They participated in the debates and they had interviews and so on. And the result of these scholars was that this was a very positive event, that citizens were able to debate on a really informative basis to make good proposals, and the citizens have chosen their subjects themselves. Participating were 1,800 citizens. They were randomly chosen all over Europe, and they have chosen 3 subjects, which shows us that they were really knowing what is going on. The first subject was environmental policy. The second subject was the social and economic situation of families. And the third subject was the role of the European Union in the world, also having a look at migration and the role of migration. So these subjects, which 1,800 citizens have chosen in their debates, still are relevant. And so we can see it does make sense. But the end of this last time's conference was that the citizens, a delegation of the citizens, of course, handed over to the European Commission a document with their proposal, and that's it. Nothing happened afterwards. This was not taken into regard. And I think here, this must be a change how the current conference on the future of Europe is working. So they should, from the beginning, and I think there are some signs that they are doing this, there should be links between the citizens' debates and politicians. It should not just be between citizens, but also already in the process of the conference, there should be communication between representatives and represented. The other point is that when you look at the organization of this conference, some members of the citizens' conferences should also participate in on the last level in the plenary session. So we have now, since short time already, rules of procedure. And I must say, I was really surprised because so far this has never been planned, and it makes sense what they have in the rules. This is in Article 16 in these rules of procedure. And there you'll find that the plenary session is not just members of the institutions. This has been planned since January. I was following up all the documents, and in the plenary, in the end, it was always the European Parliament, the European Commission, the Council, and so on. But now they plan not only to have 108 members of the European Parliament and to have members of the national parliaments and Commission and so on, but also to have 180 citizens representatives. So this will be 80 citizens of the citizens, now the citizen conferences. There are on the European level, there will also be events of these debates, and 80 members chosen also by lot, randomly chosen, will then participate in the final plenary session. These will be 80, then they take 72 of the national events. So there are also national events of this European conference. And then they have one person who is the president of the youth conference. One thing also in this plenary session is that at least a third should be people all around Europe below the age of 25. So I think this, at least on the organizational level, is very different from the last conference, and I think in a good direction. Of course, when you have this plenary, the citizens, as they are chosen randomly, they cannot really vote what will be the proposals. But at least it's not just giving a document written, but being there in person, 108 citizens, and really debating, taking up the arguments coming from these citizens' conferences. And so I think this idea to integrate not just the institutions in the plenary session, but also the citizens who have been debating, I think this makes sense. To really have an effect in the end, I think the conference cannot end with the plenary session. So far, officially, this is the end. Once the plenary session has been, then there will be proposals, and that will be the end. And here, I think my argument is this is not enough, because then, you know, after some years, one will say, well, what has been realized, this point and this point, we should not just rely on that, because this is, you know, everyday life as everywhere, not just on the European Union level. We have so much to do. Then this has been a nice event, and it has been a lively debate, and there have been proposals, and, you know, it's there on my table, perhaps this is interesting, and this, it should have a real effect, and this would mean, I think, treaty changes. As we have seen from the start of my argument, that the European Union has developed by ad hoc measures since the Euro crisis, you know, we have so many changes in European governance, which, you know, they are in treaties outside the European treaties. And they are not really written in the European treaties, and I think we must reflect the transformation of the European Union into a political identity in the treaties. And for that we need changes. Of course, everybody says now this is illusion. This is typical a scholar, you know. She doesn't have to look at the real world in politics, and she writes a paper and nobody wants it. So far, just France and Germany are really in favor of having treaty changes and a convention. But I think perhaps if this is really debated, and if the conference and the plenary in the end would mention this as a possibility, perhaps more member states would join. So one would have to see if this is really an illusion. But I think without treaty changes, this will again just be a step, you know, ad hoc step, but with no real effect. And I think, for example, having a fiscal union, having more European taxes to really shape the way we are living together in Europe, we need treaty changes. We need more majority decisions, as we all know. We need much more external policy to have a really important role within the world. So I think this link between the conference and the convention, for me, is decisive, really, for the success of the conference. I think I should stop here, and we should go to the questions, and I look very much forward, and I think Kolja will take the questions, and then I can answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your very interesting and really pointed talk, which I think not only introduced us to the whole complexity of the issue, but also raises a lot of questions from the audience and also for us to be discussed here, such as, for example, you mentioned it at the end, the effect that this convention this conference should have, pointing into the direction of a convention on the future of Europe to a certain degree, something that, of course, may not be that easily achieved, but this we can obviously debate here in our discussion. I'm inviting again all our participants to write their questions in the chat function, which you can find in the tools, so that we can point them towards Professor Christine Landfried. We have a first question. The first question, Christine, is coming from Professor Gabriele Abels from the University of Tübingen. And she is asking whether you think that more regional involvement in the conference on the future of Europe would improve the link between citizens and representatives. You mentioned the composition. You were referring to the current rules of procedure of the Conference on the Future of Europe. There is also mentioning in Article 16 on the Committee on the Future, on the Committee of the Regions. But the question of Gabriele Abels is, to which degree do you think that regional involvement in the conference really improves and can improve the link between citizens and representatives?
Well, thank you very much, and lovely to know that Gabriele Abels is participating in the webinar. Of course, we know each other as colleagues, and I think, Gabriele, you are absolutely right. Regional involvement and regional sort of making it really strong would improve the conference on the future of Europe. This is also why I think that in the end they have only one member in the plenary of the national events, which also include then the regional events, is probably not enough. We know that, you know, if you take also at the borders between member states, these regions obviously are much more cooperating, and I think this would be a good idea also if we think about treaty changes, to have more cooperation, because as we all know, politics starts at the local level. And then we have the regional level, and then we have the national and the European level. And this is part of Europe. It's not just, you know, the European level. And I think this is why strengthening the regional part would be important. I fully agree.
Thank you very much for your answer, Christina. I would like to follow up perhaps on the link between the conference on the future of Europe and the citizens. You mentioned that it is actually one of the chances, one of the opportunities of the conference on the future of Europe to reflect upon the issues which the European Union is currently concerned with, and to actually have a debate, with the citizens, but also to have, if you like, a public sphere around the European Union created through this conference on the future of Europe. So to which degree, what would be the conditions to facilitate that? Actually, I mean, what does it take to actually make this conference on the future of Europe more visible, so that we can really create a debate around this conference on the future of Europe? Currently, we have the participation platform. It's a first hybrid form of creating a new public sphere. But how do you see this evolving, and what are the conditions to really create a European debate?
Well, thank you, Kolja. This is, of course, an important point. We have to see that this conference was not planned just to have it online. This was, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. So they had to start. First of all, they started now a year later, and now they had to start this online. And if you look on the online, actually, it's not so overwhelming. I looked this morning, and so far there are 16,210 participants. This is not too much for online. And they have chosen 10 topics and 4,300 ideas so far. So far this is limited. Even online gives so many opportunities. So I think to really make it visible, we need also the physical meetings now, the fora of citizens on the regional, on the national, and on the European level. They also plan this. It's not planned just to have it online, but I think the chance is only open now. So this is why I think besides having this online debates, we need also, imagine on the national level a debate on now environmental policy. They should invite members of the European Parliament, citizens. There should be real sort of physical meetings. This can be meetings of 20 persons. This can be meetings of 30 persons. And what they also plan, what I think is a good idea, if such now 20 people really meeting, let's say 3 times on a certain subject, they can ask the Commission for experts, giving them more information on a topic. And I think making it more visible would also mean then in the end that they are in the plenary. There will be, the television, of course. This will be in television, like now the opening session. So this should be, if it's art or another television. So there could be these fora of citizens, could be also televised. They could be, of course, also online, but there should be a core of really meetings as far as it is possible again. And in the end also, which is, if it would be a convention after the conference, I think, of course, they cannot imagine to have citizens voting in a convention when they make treaty changes. But why not have, let's say, 50 citizens as members participating, discussing, not voting in the end, but observing, being there, having the background of having these citizens fora and so on. So as they, so far the last plenary was always planned just the institutions. Suddenly it's possible. So why should it not be possible also to have a certain number of citizens which are, of course, not representative in the end, but who participate. And, these are multiplicators to all the member states. So I think it must be part of it, not just online, to really make it visible. Otherwise, it's astonishing. I would have expected much more persons online because it's so easy. It's very easy. So even I manage, when you go in that, it's very quick. You don't have to give many details, and you can chat with others, you can link, and you would think young persons would be much more active. And in so far, I also think it's a good thing that on all parts of this conference, there is a certain number, there must be young people under 25 years participating.
Thank you very much, Christina. We have in the meantime a couple of questions that are highly interesting, and I don't want to keep them away from you for too much longer. So let me start with a question that we actually got from Martin Potuček from Charles University in Prague. He asked how to change the Lisbon Treaty when the European Commission itself is actually strongly opposing this idea. I think that the question of Martin refers to some changes perhaps in the direction of the Commission. We should of course, understand that the original idea came from Ursula von der Leyen, right? It was basically the offer to the European Parliament to rethink the Spitzenkandidaten process, right? And to do that through the Conference on the Future of Europe. But indeed, the Commission has changed course. So the question of Martin is how to change the Lisbon Treaty when the European Commission is strongly opposing this idea. And then we have two more questions of one, perhaps I only pick one for now, which is basically also a little bit about treaty changes and the complexity that you alluded to, how to deal with crisis. Walter Feil is asking, we see new forms of European cooperation after a meeting of the European Council being created outside the EU framework. There is no correction on democratic governance afterwards. Don't we need institutional change to prevent this? So two questions that point into the direction of the interests that are here at stake, perhaps also interests that will have to basically be overcome to actually arrive at treaty changes.
Well, thanks again for these really challenging questions, I must say, and you are very right. So coming to the first question of Martin, well, it's true. The Commission, they are not in favor of treaty changes. And, you know, many member states, as I said, just France and Germany so far, are really have publicly said they are in favor. They think also about treaty changes. Macron always said it, but these are not enough people and the Commission is against. But to start, you know, as you all know, this is in the European Treaty, Article 48, to start a convention, not only the Commission can start this, also member states can start this. And this must be then decided to make a convention or not, if these are really not just small changes you can make in other ways, but if you really would need a convention, there does not need to be a consensus to start the convention. Then as far as I remember, 48, you can make this by a majority principle to start the convention. This is not yet a treaty change. So I think, yes, I would agree with the skepticism that the development of the Commission not being in favor, that this is a problem when one thinks of having a convention and treaty changes, and the conference having sort of being the basis of such a convention. So I think this is true. But, you know, there are, you know, 2 years ago, nobody would have expected that Germany would accept to be liable for common debts of the European Union, that this would be possible to have some sort of a, what we have now, the Next Generation EU program. Everybody would have said, no, this is not possible. This has been a taboo for decades. Now it was possible. So I think one should see what the conference is going on. And actually, this is connected to the next question. I forgot the name now of the person.
It's Walter Feil.
Walter?
Walter Feil.
Walter Feil. Okay, so this is, I absolutely agree that we have so many changes of European governance outside the treaty changes, you know, with the Euro crisis. This was a very good example, you know. So these are not treaty changes, but these were treaties outside, where also even member states outside the European Union could participate. So I think this is not the way how this should develop. Of course, some people like Vivian Schmidt also was in your RECONNECT forum in your project, and she proposes a differentiated European Union. And she says, well, we will not have real treaty changes. There will not be a consensus about this. So we should have these circles where we have a strong in that area and the others can join or don't join. Even if this would be the outcome of the conference, that there is a convention not possible, and we would have these sort of differentiated Europe, I think we also need treaty changes. You cannot make a European Union of certain circles. This would be then really have treaties outside the treaties. So even for the choice to have a core European Union in certain areas, for example, some member states participating in the fiscal union, and the others can join after a certain time or fulfilling the conditions. I think this should also be, as I would agree with the last question, inside the treaties. And for that, we also need not just, the enforced integration. In German, verstärkte Zusammenarbeit. What is the English expression, Kolja? This is
it's a good. Now you surprised me with the question. It's the enhanced cooperation.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. The enhanced cooperation. Sorry that I didn't get it immediately. So we have this possibility, but I think this is not enough. If one would wants to decide to have this direction, this must also be in the treaties. Then you also have to change just this article of enhanced cooperation. And I think in the long run, we cannot avoid treaty changes. And if you look to the literature, of course, all scholars also agree. When they make proposals how to reform the European Union, the first sentence everybody is always writing, this is possible without treaty changes. So what do I propose? So nobody says, I propose something which is only possible with treaty changes, because they are afraid saying, well, this is illusionary. And I think we should start a little bit to stop this narrative and to say, probably we might not be able to circumvent treaty changes all the time and to end up to have new forms. I really agree with that last comment, new forms outside the treaties. So why do we then need the European Union? And if we think of my argument with difference, of course, I would prefer not to have just a differentiated European Union, with one circle here and one circle there. So if I look at Vivian Schmidt's proposals, they are very interesting. So this could be a way out of being locked in. But I would still prefer to have not just differentiated Europe and different speeds of European integration.
Thank you very much, Christina. And I think it's very interesting what you say, because if I read this between the lines, it also means that we should perhaps not give up this project that we at the time called the constitutionalization of the European Union, right? Making actually the effort to turn the treaties into a constitution of the European Union that is somewhat more transparent, somewhat simpler, and also more efficient in actually dealing with the differences around the table, be it member states, be it citizens, but definitely not a splittering of different forms of governance under one umbrella, the European Union. So I think that it's a very interesting point that I think we can pick up perhaps towards the end of the debate again. The question really, what is the overall objective? What should the overall objective be in terms of a treaty change? Are we going into another treaty, or should it even be more, as it was the ambition in the first half of the new millennium? Perhaps two more questions along these lines, because I find them extremely interesting. There is one question by one of our participants. I don't know the name. I can't see the name here in the chat, but he's asking, she is asking, if the institutions fail to institutionalize the outcomes of the citizen deliberation at the European level, is there a risk that a relative failure of this exercise would undermine the overall effort, meaning that there is little follow-up and implementation, that basically we have a discrepancy between, on the one hand, the deliberations, but also at the same time then limited implementation. At the same time, I think a very interesting question from Leonard Hawks from Brussels, who is asking, basically, you mentioned Brexit as a negative consequence of the differences in the EU, but should it also be seen in the context of the politicization of the EU that you identify? So, is there a danger that deepening the debate at the political level in the context of a convention will only increase a tendency to splittering of the EU when citizens are concentrating on recovery and jobs at the national level? So actually, could there be an unintended, so to speak, negative potential of difference, if I understand the question correct, in the conference and a potential convention on the future of Europe?
Well, thank you very much. These are now three. I will come to your point, constitutional treaty, perhaps to the end. I should first ask the other two questions, and I think this sums very nicely up what you said. First, the question of the participants: what happens when the institutions fail to implement, in what way ever, some of the proposals at least? So I think this would be a disaster. And from the last time, we have learned that, 1,800 citizens participating were not just a few persons. These were nearly 2,000 persons. And they expected, of course, that their proposals would have an impact. And when they realized this, you can see it in the evaluation report, that nothing of this was just, even coming to a level of perhaps a draft of a European regulation or anything like that, they were very disappointed. So when they were asked by the scholars in these interviews they were made afterwards, when they could see that there was no consequence, the disappointment was great. And I think if this is repeated, that you have debates and engagement, also citizens take their time for that, and it's just in the end something on paper and nobody cares of the elected representatives, this would be very bad. And I think insofar this question is very important. We have to keep in mind this. Then the other question, can't there be a politicization with a negative also effect? Of course, this can always be. We can have a politicization and people in the end say, well, we don't want this European Union anymore. But I think if we want to go on with the European Union, we need the politicization. This might have positive or negative effects. It might have, as we saw with Brexit, it's absolutely true what Lennart said, that had a negative effect. This was about the difference about sovereignty. Can we be sovereign in a European Union? And a majority of the Brits said, no, we want our sovereignty, and this cannot be realized within the European Union. There was a real principle dissent. But politicization is, I think, you cannot circumvent this if you want to have a European Union with competencies which make it a political organization. So I think this also has the danger of a negative. Of course, if you have now this program, Next Generation EU, it can be that some countries say, well, we are disadvantaged, we did not get enough, and our programs were not accepted by the European Commission. So this is very political. There can be member states who say, well, why do they say that this country gets more and they have extremely problems with the COVID-19 pandemic? We have it as well. How do you measure this? So I think there will be a politicization about the rule of law principle. This is still in the air. It's not solved. So politicization is a risk. Yes, but we have to take this risk. I think without politicization, then you just have a European Union of technocrats. And we have had it very long time, always saying, well, this is, a technical question. No, how the euro crisis was managed, this is not just a technical question. Of course, you can also say the next generation EU program, this is a technical thing. We want to solve the COVID-19 consequences. No, this is now making the European Commission really more or less a financial ministry. So we have to debate, how do they, what's the democratic legitimacy of that? If we want to have a European financial policy, how is the European Parliament really involved? And we cannot just solve it within a program which is more or less about the household. And I think this has been done far too long. And always the public debates outside. You cannot expect a normal citizen to read the regulations of the European Union and to realize what is changing and to see that this program is a fiscal union. So I think, yes, I agree with the comment, politicization is a risk, but it's a necessary risk. So which brings me to Kolja's comment, would it be the time now to take up again a constitutional treaty? We remember 2005, one can, from looking back now, say perhaps it was too early. This is how we had an interview with Giuliano Amato, who was very much involved in the last convention. And he said, well, perhaps we wanted too much. If we accept this, that it's sort of, it was very early for they didn't call it really constitution, but constitutional treaty, to show that it's sort of both sides a little bit. I think in the long run, we will need a European constitution or a constitutional treaty as a basis, a constitutional treaty which, doesn't go into details. There is even the proposal of one scholar from Germany, Dieter Grimm, who says all the details which are in the second part, of the working of the European Union. So this does not belong in such a treaty. This is about really specialized policy fields. So what we need, the mechanisms of governance and the values of the European Union. And it would be perhaps also a chance, to have now this, it's only 1 year, this conference on the future of Europe, but we will see where it does lead to. Even if it's not yet possible to have a European constitution, the treaty changes could be in that direction. The treaty changes could concentrate on what we now know as the Treaty of the European Union, about the more general things, and putting the details, which are more policy fields. This is also why the European is so much depoliticized and so much about deregulation, because we have on a level of treaties understood, well, the treaties are dealt with like a constitution, actually. And then, it's taken out of the politicization of the political debates, and it must be in the political debate, what sort of social policy do we want? This was, by the way, one of the results of the last conference in 2006-07, that the citizens said, we want more European social policy, and this is a public debate thing. It cannot be decided by technocrats on the level of the European Commission, even if I would not say they are just technocrats. They are political, they have a political mind, of course, but this is not what we need as a democratic legitimacy.
Thank you very much, Christina. I have one last question, if you allow, from the chat, and I think it fits very well. If we assume that there is some sort of a treaty change, even first of all, that there is some sort of a result coming out of this conference on the future of Europe, what would it take to get there? And the question of Gilles Fepret is actually the following: considering that there are so many frictions between different generations, between regions, between jobs, nations, in this conference on the future of Europe, which dynamics of negotiation can be envisioned to bridge these in solidarity? So how can we actually arrive in the next year towards the end of this conference, given all the frictions, all the differences that we have, both across nations, but also obviously vertically, people who have more, people who have less, who have benefited from the EU, who have never had a chance to actually profit from the project EU. How can we actually envision a negotiation to bridge these in solidarity? That's the question of Gilles Fabre.
Well, thank you very much, Gilles, for this question. How can we overcome these frictions? So first, in the conference, the plenary session, this is planned well, of course, the citizens can only debate there. The institutions, the representatives of the institutions will decide about the proposals, but they will take in the proposals of the citizens. And so far in the rules of procedure, they have said only there will be proposals which find a consensus between the institutions. So this might be then in the end, that's only a minimal consensus which they find, and the changes are not very far reaching. So I would agree that one could expect this if they want a consensus between the institutions. So what I would agree with Gilles, that then this would not make much change. But if this goes to a convention, I think, if you would open up for real treaty changes, we would have a next step. And then, of course, might be also proposals which did not result in a consensus could play a part again. Also, when you have a convention in the end, this is only a proposal for the heads of state of government. They all, if it becomes a new treaty or constitutional treaty, they all have to agree. This is the next difficulty. We know that. But there is which is somehow, I think, very often overlooked, the current treaty article on that, 48 of the European Treaty. That it says when then there are difficulties in the member states and they don't agree the treaty changes, and if these 2/3 of the other member states have agreed, then we will come together and debate what will be happening. So if there would be some member states who don't agree with the treaty changes, this is not the end of the story. So one will see. So usually it's always assumed that if they don't agree with what is proposed, this is the end. So far in the Treaty 48 article, it doesn't say this. There is the possibility then to come together and to say, well, 2/3 of the member states said yes, 1/3 said no, or they had a referenda with no. What are we doing now? So it depends. It's again politicization. It's then a political question, and nobody can predict that.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your answer. We are coming towards the end of our webinar for today. We have had a wonderful presentation by Christine Landfried on the link between the ongoing conference on the future of Europe with the potential for treaty changes, potentially through a new convention on the future of Europe, but also thanks to all of you participants, a lot of questions and comments on the obstacles and the potentials that there are on the way towards the end of the conference and potentially beyond it. So thank you very much for what was in the end a debate about Europe, about the European Union, the current challenges it faces, but also potential ways to come out of what is still, I would argue, an ongoing multiple crisis that the European Union tries to overcome. And why not through another round of treaty changes, as we learned today. So thank you very much, Christine Landfried, for being with us today. Thank you to all the participants who were in the background for all of your wonderful questions, and stay with us until the next webinar. Thank you very much and have a good day.
And thank you very much, everybody who organized it and all the participants.
Thank you, Christine. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.